The blood on Vinnie Torino's knuckles came from punching his apartment wall, not from the men who'd been following him for 3 days. He crouched behind a dumpster in the alley behind Paulie's Deli, his breath forming clouds in the December air as footsteps echoed off the brick walls. They'd found him again. "Check the back," a voice called out. Professional, calm, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who cleaned up problems for a living. Vinnie pressed himself deeper into the shadows, clutching the manila envelope against his chest. Inside were photocopies of documents that should have been destroyed 60 years ago. Documents that proved his mother Rosa hadn't lost her nerve in 1963. She'd been silenced. The footsteps grew closer. Vinnie's phone buzzed. A text from his nephew Tommy, Uncle the Fifth. "Where are you? Found more stuff about Grandma Rosa. This is bigger than we thought." If only the kid knew how big. If only Vinnie had left well enough alone when Tommy first showed him that old Sullivan footage 3 weeks ago. His mother spinning in a blue dress, voice like honey and smoke, the camera loving every angle of her face, the audience on their feet. Ed Sullivan himself looking mesmerized. She could have been the next Ella Fitzgerald, Tommy had said, replaying the clip on his laptop. So why'd she quit? Why'd she never talk about it? Because some secrets were meant to stay buried. Because asking the wrong questions got you hunted through Queens alleys by men who made people disappear. The footsteps stopped just feet from his hiding spot. Vinnie could smell cigarette smoke, expensive cologne. Through a gap between garbage bags, he glimpsed polished shoes that cost more than his monthly rent. "He's here somewhere," the voice said into a phone. "Yeah, we know about the kid too, the nephew. Both problems get solved tonight. Tommy." Jesus Christ, they knew about Tommy. Vinnie's mind raced back to the nursing home in Brooklyn, to Margaret Kellerman's papery hand gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Sullivan's assistant for 37 years, 93 years old, her memory sharp as broken glass when it came to December 1963. "Your mother saw something she shouldn't have seen," Margaret had whispered, glancing around the sterile room. Someone she shouldn't have seen it with. The letter that killed her career? It wasn't about her voice, Mr. Torino. It was about her silence. She'd pressed a key into his palm then, brass and old, warm from her touch. Storage unit in Manhattan. Sullivan kept files. Insurance, he called it. "What you find there?" She'd trailed off, her eyes suddenly frightened. Maybe some stones should stay unturned. But Vinnie had turned them anyway. Driven into the city, found the storage facility, opened the unit that hadn't been touched since Sullivan's death. Boxes of files, photographs, recordings, and in the back, a safe containing documents that connected his mother's disappearance from show business to names that still appeared in newspapers. Politicians who'd built dynasties, entertainment executives who'd shaped American culture. All of them young men in 1963. All of them with everything to lose if Rosa Torino had talked about what she'd witnessed. The envelope in his hands contained proof that his mother's silence had been bought with threats, and when the money hadn't been enough, when Rosa had tried to return to performing in small clubs, other measures had been taken. The newspaper clipping was dated March 15, 1964. Local singer dies in house fire. 4 paragraphs. No investigation. Case closed before it opened. His mother hadn't died of a broken dream. She'd been murdered. "Got him," the voice said, and suddenly Vinnie was being dragged from behind the dumpster, rough hands yanking him to his feet. 2 men in dark coats, faces he didn't recognize but eyes he'd seen before. The kind of eyes that belonged to people who cleaned up other people's messes. "The envelope, Mr. Torino," the taller one said, extending a gloved hand. "And any copies you might have made." "I don't know what you're talking about." The lie tasted like copper in his mouth. The shorter man smiled, pulling out a cell phone. He showed Vinnie the screen, a photo of Tommy walking out of his high school, backpack slung over his shoulder, completely unaware he was being watched. 17 years old, the man said. Whole life ahead of him. Be a shame if he had an accident. Kids these days, always looking at their phones, not paying attention to traffic. Vinnie's hand tightened on the envelope. 60 years of lies. 60 years of living with the ghost of a woman he'd never really known. And now Tommy was in danger because they dared to ask questions. "What do you want?" Vinnie asked, though he already knew the answer. Same thing we wanted from your mother, the tall man said, for this to never have happened. The shorter man stepped closer, and Vinny saw the outline of a gun beneath his coat. Some stories are too dangerous to tell, Mr. Torino. Your mother learned that lesson. Time you learned it too. The alley smelled like rotting vegetables in desperation, but Vinny forced himself to meet the shorter man's eyes. Up close, he could see the scar running from the man's left ear to his jawline, old, surgical in its precision. This wasn't some street thug. These were professionals, the kind who measured their success by how quietly problems disappeared. My mother was 23 years old, Vinny said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. She had a voice that could make angels weep. What the hell could she have seen that was worth killing her for? The tall man's smile was winter cold. Your mother was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the right connections. Sometimes that's all it takes. Vinny thought about Tommy's face 3 weeks ago, lit up by the laptop screen as he discovered those old Sullivan clips on YouTube. His nephew had the same dark eyes as Rosa, the same stubborn set to his jaw when something captured his attention. Tommy was the only family Vinny had left, the only person who still looked at him like he might accomplish something worthwhile, instead of just booking third-rate lounge acts for Knights of Columbus dinners. The storage unit, Vinny said. How long have you known about it? Since the day Sullivan died, the shorter man replied. We've been patient, waiting for someone to come looking. Your mother's people, mostly. Her sister called us for years, asking questions. Then her son, your brother Michael, started sniffing around in the 80s. Vinny's blood chilled. Michael had died in a car accident in 1987. Single vehicle, late night, black ice. At least, that's what the police report had said. You see how this works, Mr. Torino, the tall man continued. This isn't personal. It's arithmetic. A few lives weighed against a very large number of careers, reputations, family legacies. The math always works out the same way. A siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. The two men didn't even glance toward the sound. Whatever authority those sirens represented, it wasn't coming for them. Vinny realized with crystalline clarity that he could die in this alley and it would be ruled a mugging gone wrong. Another small-time operator who'd finally run up against something bigger than himself. But Tommy would keep digging. The kid was relentless when something caught his interest, a trait that reminded Vinny painfully of Rosa based on the stories his father used to tell. How she'd practice the same song 50 times until every note was perfect. How she'd research every venue, every musician, every possible connection that might advance her career. That same obsessive curiosity now lived in Tommy, and it would get him killed. I'll make you a deal, Vinny said, his voice barely above a whisper. The shorter man laughed, but the tall one held up a hand. We're listening. I give you everything. The envelope, the key to the storage unit, any copies I made. But you leave my nephew alone. Kid doesn't know anything that could hurt anybody. He just wanted to understand why his grandmother's pictures got hidden away. And what guarantee do we have that you won't go to the police? The FBI? Some ambitious journalist? Vinny looked down at the envelope in his hands. Inside were photographs that could topple senators, recordings that could rewrite entertainment history. Documents that proved American television's golden age was built on a foundation of blood and silence. His mother's blood, his brother's blood. Soon, maybe his own. Because I'm 58 years old, and I book wedding singers for a living, he said. Because I've spent 30 years telling people my mother was too fragile for show business when the truth is she was braver than any of us. And because if I die mysteriously right after asking questions about her, that's going to make Tommy even more curious, not less. The tall man studied Vinny's face for a long moment. Behind them, the siren had stopped, probably dealing with someone else's catastrophe. The December wind cut between the buildings, carrying the scent of snow and exhaust fumes. There's a bench in Flushing Meadows Park, the man said finally. Near the Unisphere, tomorrow, midnight. Bring everything, originals, copies, digital files, whatever notes you've taken. After that, you go back to your quiet life and forget you ever heard the name Rosa Torino in connection with anything, except a sad story about dreams that didn't come true. And Tommy, your nephew goes to college, graduates, gets a job, lives a long and unremarkable life. As long as you both understand that some stories are too expensive to tell. They released him so suddenly he almost fell. The shorter man dropped a business card at Vinny's feet, blank except for a phone number. "In case you're thinking about being clever," he said. "That number reaches people who solve problems faster than you can create them." Then they were gone, disappearing into the maze of alleys like they'd never been there at all. Vinny stood alone among the garbage and shadows, holding 60 years of secrets and wondering what Rosa had seen that December night in 1963 that had signed her death warrant. Tomorrow he would surrender the truth to keep Tommy safe. Tonight, he had one last chance to understand what his mother had died protecting. Vinny's hands shook as he unlocked his apartment door, the manila envelope tucked inside his jacket like a time bomb against his ribs. The hallway light flickered, had been flickering for 3 months, casting stuttering shadows that made every corner look like it might be hiding watchers. He'd checked his back 6 times walking home, but paranoia felt like sanity now. Inside, the apartment felt different. Wrong. Nothing obviously disturbed, but 30 years of living in the same space had taught him its rhythms. The stack of mail on the kitchen counter sat too neatly. The bedroom door stood open exactly 3 inches wider than he'd left it. They'd been here. His landline's red light blinked insistently. 7 messages. Vinny's stomach clenched as he hit play, expecting threats, warnings, maybe Tommy's voice cut short by, "Uncle the Fifth, it's me." Tommy's voice filled the small apartment, alive and urgent. "Listen, I went to see Mrs. Castellano today. You know, the old lady from Mom's building who knew Grandma Rosa? She said something weird. Said Rosa didn't die in 1964. Vinny's legs gave out. He sank into his father's old recliner, the envelope sliding to the floor. She insists she saw Rosa in 1967, at a grocery store in New Jersey. Said she tried to say hello, but Rosa looked right through her like she didn't recognize her own neighbor of 15 years. Mrs. Castellano thinks maybe Rosa was, I don't know, sick or something? But Uncle the Fifth, what if she wasn't dead? What if... The machine cut Tommy off. Message too long. The next voice made Vinny's blood freeze. "Vincent," a woman's voice, cultured, with the fading traces of a Brooklyn accent scrubbed away by decades of careful diction. "My name is Catherine Sullivan. Ed was my father." Vinny lunged for the phone, nearly knocking over a lamp. Catherine Sullivan. He'd read about her in old entertainment magazines, Sullivan's only daughter, a reclusive woman who'd inherited his estate and spent 40 years avoiding interviews. "I know men have been following you. I know you found my father's storage unit. We need to talk, but not over the phone. There's a diner in Manhattan, Mel's, on 47th and Broadway. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. Come alone and Mr. Torino?" A pause, heavy with meaning. "Bring your mother's jewelry box." The line went dead. Vinny stared at the phone. Rosa's jewelry box. A small wooden thing with mother-of-pearl inlay that had sat on his dresser for 30 years, filled with her costume jewelry and a few worthless keepsakes. How could Sullivan's daughter know about something so personal, so insignificant? Unless it wasn't insignificant. He was reaching for the box when his cell phone rang. Tommy's number. "Don't answer," he whispered to himself, but his hand was already moving. "Tommy? Uncle the Fifth." Thank God. "Listen, you need to get over here right now. I'm at the library, the big one on Northern Boulevard. I've been going through old newspapers on microfiche, and I found something about Grandma Rosa that's going to blow your mind. Tommy, listen to me very carefully. You need to stop." She didn't just disappear from show business. She disappeared, period. Like completely. No death certificate in New York. No obituary in any of the local papers. The fire that supposedly killed her? I can't find any fire department records, any insurance claims, nothing. Uncle the Fifth, I don't think Rosa Torino died in 1964. I think someone wanted people to believe she died. The room spun around Vinny. Through the thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Chen's television, a commercial for laundry detergent promising to make everything clean again. He thought about the tall man's cold smile, about 60 years of lies, about his nephew's voice bright with discovery and completely unaware of the danger closing around them both. "Where are you exactly?" Vinny asked, grabbing his coat. "3rd floor, in the newspaper archives section. Uncle the Fifth, there's more. I found a marriage license from 1965. Rosa Torino to someone named James Morrison in Atlantic City. She was alive, she was married, and somebody went to a lot of trouble to erase that fact. The line crackled with static, and for a moment Vinny heard something else underneath. A sound like footsteps, like someone climbing stairs. "Tommy," Vinny said urgently, "I need you to hang up right now and walk to the main desk. Stay around people. Don't go anywhere alone. Uncle the Fifth, what's—" The phone went dead. Vinny was already running. Lungs burned as he sprinted through the library's main entrance, his dress shoes slipping on the polished marble floor. The elderly security guard looked up from his newspaper, startled by the middle-aged man in a wrinkled coat who'd just burst through the doors like he was fleeing a fire. "Third floor," Vinny gasped, not waiting for directions, taking the stairs 3 at a time. The newspaper archives section sprawled across half the floor, rows of microfiche machines humming under fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly yellow. A few researchers hunched over screens, scrolling through decades of headlines, but Vinny didn't see Tommy anywhere. "Excuse me." He approached a librarian, a thin woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "My nephew, 17, dark hair, probably asking a lot of questions about old newspapers?" Her expression shifted, something cautious creeping into her features. "Are you Vincent Torino?" The way she said his name made his stomach drop. Not a question, not really. Recognition. "Where is he?" "He left about 10 minutes ago. With his father, I assumed. Older gentleman, very well dressed. Said there was a family emergency." She paused, studying Vinny's face. The boy seemed reluctant to go. Vinny's vision grayed at the edges. Tommy didn't have a father. His sister Maria had raised the kid alone after her boyfriend disappeared when she got pregnant. What did this man look like? Tall, silver hair, expensive coat. He knew the boy's name, knew he was researching his grandmother. Very authoritative. The librarian's voice grew smaller. "I'm sorry, I should have asked for identification, but he seemed to know all the right details, because they'd been listening, watching, learning everything they needed to walk into Tommy's life and pluck him out like he belonged to them." Vinny pulled out his phone with shaking fingers, dialed Tommy's number, straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Did they say where they were going? The librarian shook her head, but an elderly man at a nearby microfiche machine looked up. "I heard them talking by the elevators," he said quietly. "Something about Atlantic City. The kid kept asking about someone named Morrison." James Morrison, the name from the marriage license Tommy had found. Even now, even with his nephew in the hands of professional killers, Vinny's mind couldn't stop turning over the implications. Rosa had survived, had married, had lived at least 3 more years after her supposed death, hidden away in New Jersey while her family grieved a lie. "Sir?" The librarian touched his arm gently. "Should I call the police?" Vinny almost laughed. Call the police and say what? That his dead mother wasn't actually dead? That men who'd been covering up a 60-year-old secret had taken his nephew? That he had evidence connecting entertainment legends to murder, but he'd promised to hand it over to keep Tommy safe? "No," he said. "No police." He walked to the table where Tommy had been working. Scattered printouts lay across the surface. Marriage records, real estate transactions, newspaper clippings. His nephew had been thorough, methodical, following a paper trail that led from Rosa Torino's supposed death in 1964 to Rosa Morrison's life in Atlantic City. A life that had lasted until... when? Vinny gathered the papers with trembling hands. A death certificate from 1973. Rosa Morrison, age 33, heart failure, natural causes. But something about it felt wrong, too clean. The same surgical precision he'd seen in covering up her first death. His phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number: Park, midnight. Or the boy disappears permanently. Vinny stared at the words until they blurred. The meeting was still 12 hours away, but they had Tommy now. Insurance, leverage, proof that they could reach anyone in his life whenever they chose. "Mr. Torino?" The librarian again, her voice carefully neutral. There was something else. After the boy left, another man came asking about him. Shorter, with a scar on his face. He seemed very interested in what research had been done here. The shorter man from the alley. They weren't just watching anymore. They were closing loops, eliminating traces of Tommy's investigation. Soon there would be no evidence that any of this had ever happened. Just like in 1964, when Rosa Torino had vanished so completely that even her death records were fabricated. Vinny's hands found Rosa's photograph in his wallet, the only picture he carried, taken on her last Christmas, 1963. She wore a blue dress, the same color as the one in the Sullivan show footage. Her smile looked tired now that he knew what to look for. The smile of someone carrying a weight too heavy to bear. "I'm sorry, Mama," he whispered to the photograph. "I should have let the dead stay dead." But it was too late for apologies. Too late for everything except the terrible arithmetic the tall man had described. A few lives weighed against powerful secrets. Tommy's life weighed against 60 years of carefully constructed lies. Vinny pocketed the papers and headed for the exit, knowing he was walking toward his nephew's execution and his own. Some stories, it seemed, really were too dangerous to tell. Vinny stood on the library steps, December wind cutting through his coat like judgment. The papers from Tommy's research crinkled in his jacket pocket, evidence of a life his mother had lived in shadows, married to a stranger, hiding in Atlantic City while her family mourned a corpse that had never existed. 9 years. Rosa had lived 9 additional years after her supposed death, and no one who loved her had known. The weight of that realization pressed against his chest like a physical thing. All those nights he'd watched his father drink himself toward Rosa's memory, crying over a woman who was buying groceries in New Jersey. All those times Vinny had wondered what she might have accomplished, what songs she might have sung. If only she'd lived longer. She had lived longer, and she'd spent those years running. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "Your nephew wants to talk." A second later, a voicemail notification appeared. Vinny's hands shook as he pressed play. "Uncle the Fifth?" Tommy's voice was tight with fear but trying to sound casual. The way someone speaks when they know they're being listened to. "Hey, so I'm okay. I'm with some people who knew Grandma Rosa. They're telling me things about her life that, well, they're pretty incredible. But they said you have something that belongs to them? Something she left behind?" A pause, background noise, traffic, maybe a radio playing softly. Tommy was alive, but the forced cheerfulness in his voice told Vinny everything about his situation. "They said to tell you that Catherine Sullivan is lying. That meeting you're supposed to have tomorrow? It's a trap. Uncle the Fifth don't—" The message cut off abruptly. Vinny stared at his phone, mind racing. Catherine Sullivan had left that voicemail hours before Tommy was taken. Either it was an elaborate setup or she was genuinely trying to warn him about something. But warn him about what? And how had the men who took Tommy learned about the meeting so quickly? Unless they'd been monitoring his phone all along. The thought sent ice through his veins. If they'd been listening to his calls, they'd heard Tommy discovering Rosa's second life. They'd heard Catherine Sullivan mention the jewelry box. They'd heard every desperate word he'd spoken to his nephew about being careful. He'd led them straight to Tommy. Vinny pulled out his wallet again, studying Rosa's photograph with new eyes. She'd been 23 in that picture, about to perform on national television for the second time, about to see something that would force her to vanish from her own life. In 6 months, she'd be dead to the world, married to a stranger named James Morrison, starting over with nothing but whatever secrets had gotten her killed. What had she seen? What had been worth destroying a promising career, abandoning her family, living under an assumed name in a city where nobody knew her voice? The envelope in his jacket seemed to pulse with possibility. Sullivan's private files, waiting to reveal the truth that had cost his mother everything, but every minute he delayed was another minute Tommy spent in the hands of people who measured human lives like accounting entries. His phone rang. Maria's number. "Vinny. Thank God." His sister's voice was raw with panic. "Tommy never came home last night. His friend Jake said he was supposed to meet you at the library, but when I called, they said you'd left hours ago. Where is he?" The lie came automatically. "He's with me. Lost track of time doing research." Research? Vinny, what the hell is going on? Tommy's been obsessed with this thing about Mom, staying up all night looking at old newspapers online. And yesterday, some man called the house asking about him. Claimed to be from a historical society, wanted to know what documents we might have from the 1960s. They'd reached out to Maria. Of course they had. Probably talked to every surviving relative, every old neighbor, anyone who might possess some fragment of Rosa's real story. 60 years of careful surveillance, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Maria, listen to me very carefully. Take the kids and go visit Aunt Connie in Albany. Tonight. What? Vinny, you're scaring me. Please. Just do this one thing for me. Pack light, pay cash for everything, don't use credit cards. I'll explain later, but right now I need to know you're safe. The silence stretched so long he thought she'd hung up. This is about Mom, isn't it? She said finally. About why Dad used to get that look whenever her name came up. Like he was afraid of something. Dad knew? Not knew exactly, but suspected. He used to say Mom's death never made sense to him. The timing, the way her friends stopped calling, how quickly everything got handled by lawyers nobody had ever heard of. Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. Vinny, what did our mother do? The question hung in the December air like smoke. What had Rosa done? Or what had she witnessed? What secret had she carried to two graves, leaving her children to inherit only the shadow of her fear? I don't know yet, Vinny said, but I'm going to find out. After hanging up, Vinny stood frozen on the library steps, Maria's words echoing in his mind. Dad used to get that look whenever her name came up, like he was afraid of something. His father had known, not the details, maybe not the truth, but he'd sensed something wrong about Rosa's death from the beginning. All those years of drinking, all those nights Vinny had found the old man passed out in his chair with Rosa's records playing on repeat. It hadn't just been grief, it had been guilt. The guilt of a man who'd accepted a convenient lie because the truth was too dangerous to pursue, just like Vinny had been doing for 30 years. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He'd built his entire adult life around Rosa's tragedy, using her brief moment of fame as currency in a business that traded on nostalgia and faded dreams. My mother was Rosa Torino, he'd say to potential clients, to bookers, to anyone who'd listen. She was going to be the next Billie Holiday. He'd made her death the cornerstone of his identity, the romantic tragedy that explained his modest failures and small-time ambitions. But Rosa hadn't died in 1964. She'd lived, hidden, survived 9 more years under another name, which meant everything Vinny had told himself about inherited loss, about dreams cut short, about honoring her memory through his work, all of it was built on a lie. The envelope crinkled as he pulled it from his jacket. His hands moved automatically, breaking the seal, pulling out the contents before he could stop himself. The December wind scattered loose papers, and he lunged to catch them, kneeling on the cold stone steps like a penitent. Contact sheets. Dozens of small photographs arranged in grids, the kind photographers used to proof their shots. But these weren't publicity stills or performance photos. These were surveillance images. Long lens shots of Rosa in Atlantic City, taken from across streets, through windows, from parked cars. Rosa Morrison, living a life her own children had never known existed. The photos showed her aging in real time, 1965, still young, looking over her shoulder as she left a grocery store. 1967, older, thinner, walking with a man Vinny didn't recognize, James Morrison presumably. 1970, her hair grayed, her face lined with worry, standing in the doorway of a modest house with newspapers piled on the porch. But it was the final photograph that made Vinny's world collapse entirely. 1972, Rosa in a hospital bed, unconscious, connected to machines, and standing beside her, one hand on her forehead, in what might have been a gesture of tenderness or threat, was his father, who'd supposedly never known Rosa survived, who'd grieved her death for decades, drinking himself into an early grave over the loss of his wife, who'd been photographed with her in Atlantic City 8 years after she'd supposedly died. The truth rearranged itself around Vinny like broken glass finding new patterns. His father hadn't just suspected something was wrong with Rosa's death, he'd been part of covering it up. The lawyers nobody knew, the quick handling of affairs, the way Rosa's friends stopped calling. His father had orchestrated all of it, had helped fake her death, relocate her, give her a new identity, and then, somehow, had continued to see her in secret for nearly a decade. Vinny's legs gave out completely. He sat hard on the library steps, photographs scattered around him like evidence of his own delusion. 30 years of pitying his father's grief, of thinking the old man had died of a broken heart, of believing himself an orphan of tragedy. His father had been visiting Rosa the whole time. The phone buzzed against his leg. Another text, "Now you understand why your nephew has to die. Some truths are too dangerous for children to learn, but they were wrong, dead wrong in the way that only arrogance could be. Because this wasn't about protecting secrets anymore. This wasn't about the delicate feelings of aging power brokers or the reputation of dead television hosts. This was about a 17-year-old kid who'd had the courage to ask questions that 3 generations of Torino men had been too afraid to pursue. Vinny gathered the photographs with steady hands, his panic crystallizing into something harder, more focused. They thought Tommy's youth made him disposable, thought family loyalty made Vinny controllable. They'd built 60 years of success on the assumption that ordinary people would always choose comfortable lies over dangerous truths. They'd just made their first real mistake. Standing up, brushing snow from his coat, Vinny felt something shift inside him. The scared booking agent was gone, replaced by Rosa's son. Not the grieving child who'd never existed, but the heir to a woman who'd been strong enough to disappear from her own life and clever enough to stay hidden for 9 years. It was time to stop honoring his mother's memory and start learning from her survival. The walk back to his apartment passed in a haze of purposeful rage. Vinny's mind worked like his mother's must have in 1964, calculating angles, measuring risks, planning moves 3 steps ahead. They'd shown him their hand too early, revealed the scope of their surveillance, the depth of their fear. Now he had 12 hours to turn Rosa's survival instincts into Tommy's salvation. Inside his cluttered Queens apartment, Vinny spread the photographs across his kitchen table like tarot cards, revealing a fortune he'd never wanted to know. His father's face stared back from 1972, captured in that moment of terrible intimacy beside Rosa's hospital bed. The expression wasn't grief, it was guilt, the face of a man watching something precious die because he'd helped kill it. But Rosa had survived that hospitalization. The death certificate from 1973 meant she'd lived another year, maybe more. What had happened in those final months? What had finally broken a woman strong enough to fake her own death and clever enough to stay hidden for 9 years? Vinny pulled out his laptop and started typing, following Tommy's methodology. If Rosa Morrison had died in Atlantic City in 1973, there would be records, an obituary maybe, burial information, something to explain how the woman who'd been Rosa Torino had finally, actually died. The search results made his stomach drop. No obituary for Rosa Morrison in any Atlantic City newspaper from 1973, no burial record in local cemeteries, no death notice, no estate filing, no trace that Rosa Morrison had ever existed except for the marriage license Tommy had found and the death certificate that increasingly felt like another fabrication. But there was something else. A news item from September 1973, buried in the Atlantic City Press crime blotter. Woman found unconscious in hotel room, taken to Atlantic City General Hospital. Police suspect drug overdose. No identification found. The description matched Rosa's age and general appearance, but the woman had been listed as a Jane Doe, never identified, transferred after 3 days to a psychiatric facility in upstate New York. The trail went cold there. Vinny stared at the screen until the words blurred. Rosa Morrison hadn't died in 1973. She'd been disappeared, again. Drugged, hospitalized, stripped of her identity and locked away where even his father couldn't find her. The death certificate was just another layer of fiction, designed to end any possibility of further searching. His phone rang. Catherine Sullivan's name appeared on the screen. Don't answer that. Vinny spun around. A woman stood in his kitchen doorway, late 60s, silver hair, wearing an expensive coat that had seen better decades. She moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned not to make unnecessary noise. You're Catherine Sullivan. I was. Long time ago. She gestured toward his phone, still ringing. That's someone else using my name, trying to lure you into the open. They've been monitoring your calls, tracking your movements. The meeting in the park was never about negotiating. It was about cleanup. Vinny's hand moved toward the kitchen drawer where he kept a knife, but Catherine raised her hand in a gesture of peace. I'm not here to hurt you, Vincent. I'm here because your mother saved my life once, and I owed her a debt. I've been trying to pay it for 50 years. You knew her. I worked for Sullivan. Personal assistant, but also other things. Ed had arrangements with certain people, certain organizations. Your mother saw something she shouldn't have seen, recorded something she shouldn't have recorded. Not on purpose, she was just in the wrong place when very dangerous people were conducting very dangerous business. Catherine moved into the kitchen, her eyes taking in the scattered photographs, the laptop screen still showing the Jane Doe story. May I sit? This is going to take a while. Vinny remained standing, every muscle coiled. Where's my nephew? Safe, for now, but not for long. They're using him as leverage to get what they really want, the recording your mother made. The one Ed Sullivan spent the rest of his life trying to find. What recording? Catherine smiled sadly. You really don't know. Rosa never told anyone, not even your father. She hid it so well that when she was taken the final time, the secret died with her. Except it didn't die, did it? Because she was too smart for that. Too careful. She left insurance. The woman reached into her coat and pulled out a small cassette tape, the kind used in portable recorders from the 1960s. It looked ancient, fragile, but the label was clear: Rosa, October 1964. For my children. She gave this to me 3 days before she disappeared from Atlantic City. Made me promise to keep it safe until her family came looking for the truth. I've been waiting 49 years for that day. Vinny's hand trembled as he reached for the tape. What's on it? Everything, Catherine said simply. The conversation that got her killed twice. The reason Ed Sullivan never had another peaceful night's sleep. The truth about what really happened behind the cameras in the golden age of television. Outside, snow began to fall again, and somewhere in the city, his nephew waited for rescue that might never come. But in his hands, Vinny held Rosa's voice, her real voice, speaking words she'd never been allowed to say while she was alive. The point of no return had arrived at last. Vinny's hands shook as he fed the cassette into his old portable player. The same model he'd used to record client auditions for 30 years. Catherine Sullivan sat across from him, her weathered face carved with decades of guilt and watchfulness. Outside his kitchen window, Queens stretched into the snowy darkness, where Tommy waited in the hands of men who killed with the casual efficiency of accountants. The tape hissed to life with the hollow sound of 1,960 seconds recording equipment. Then Rosa's voice filled the room. Not the polished performer's voice from the Ed Sullivan Show, but the raw, frightened whisper of a 24-year-old woman who'd stumbled into something that would destroy her life. This is Rosa Torino, October 15, 1964. If anyone finds this tape, it means they've killed me for what I saw backstage after the Sullivan Show. I'm recording this in Catherine's apartment because I trust her and because someone needs to know the truth. Vinny closed his eyes, hearing his mother's voice for the first time in 49 years. Not the sanitized recordings he'd treasured, but her actual words, unfiltered and alive with terror. Ed brought me back to his office after the show to discuss future appearances. But when I got there, he wasn't alone. 3 men in expensive suits were counting money. More cash than I'd ever seen. Stacks and stacks on Sullivan's desk. They were discussing which acts to promote, which records would get radio play, how much it would cost to make certain singers disappear from the charts. The tape crackled, and Rosa's breathing became audible, quick, shallow, the sound of someone realizing they'd witnessed something lethal. But it wasn't just payola. They were talking about specific people, specific threats. A folk singer in California who'd been asking questions about union connections. A comedian who'd made jokes about the wrong families. Ed was taking orders, writing names in a ledger. And then one of them said my name. Vinny's eyes snapped open. Catherine was watching him with the patience of someone who'd carried this burden for half a century. Rosa Torino, the man said. She's got the voice, but she's Paul Torino's daughter, the longshoreman who wouldn't play ball with our dock operations. We need to know where her loyalties lie before we let her get too famous. The grandfather Vinny had never known, Paul Torino, who died in a construction accident when Rosa was 19. Except it hadn't been an accident. It had been punishment for refusing to cooperate with organized crime's control of the waterfront. Rosa's voice continued, gaining strength as she spoke. Ed told them I was clean, that I didn't know anything about my father's union activities. But the man laughed and said it didn't matter. "Blood tells," he said, "and her voice is too powerful, too memorable. People like that become problems eventually. Better to handle it now while she's still small time." Vinny understood now why Rosa had run. Not because of what she'd done, but because of who she was. The daughter of a man who'd chosen principle over profit, inherited his dangerous integrity along with his musical talent. In 1964, that combination had been enough to sign her death warrant. I managed to slip away while they were arguing about methods. Ed looked sick, like he knew he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The last thing I heard was one of them saying they'd make it look like an overdose. Clean and sympathetic. People love a tragic jazz singer. Catherine leaned forward as the tape neared its end. "This next part is why they've never stopped searching." Rosa's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I took something from Ed's office while they were talking. A ledger book with names, dates, payments. Every payoff, every favor, every crime they've committed to control the music business. It's hidden somewhere safe. Somewhere my children will find it if anything happens to me. The truth doesn't die just because they kill the messenger." The tape ended with the sharp click of the recorder stopping. Vinny sat in the sudden silence, his mother's words reshaping everything he'd believed about his family, his industry, his life. Rosa hadn't been a victim of tragedy. She'd been a casualty of war, killed for the crime of witnessing corruption and having the courage to preserve evidence of it. "The ledger," Catherine said quietly. "That's what they really want. That's why they took your nephew. 60 years of murder, extortion, and control, all documented in Ed Sullivan's handwriting. Rosa hid it so well that 3 generations of searching couldn't find it. But Tommy found something," Vinny said, remembering his nephew's excitement about the jewelry box, the hidden compartment their grandmother had shown him. Catherine smiled, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her. Smart boy, just like his grandmother. Vinny's phone buzzed. A text from the unknown number: "You have 2 hours. Bring the ledger to Pier 47. Come alone, or the boy drowns like his great-grandfather should have." Outside, the snow fell heavier, and somewhere in the darkness, Tommy waited for an uncle who finally understood the real price of family loyalty. But this time, the Torino blood that had marked them for death would be the weapon that saved them. Rosa had taught him how to survive. Now it was time to learn how to fight back. 3 weeks after Pier 47, Vinny stood in his mother's old apartment, finally ready to clean it out. The FBI had released the scene after processing it as evidence, though they'd found nothing they hadn't already learned from the ledger Tommy had helped them locate. Ed Sullivan's careful handwriting had indeed documented 60 years of corruption, just as Rosa had promised on that crackling cassette tape. The investigation would take years to fully unravel, but the men who'd stolen 3 generations of his family's peace were already in federal custody. The apartment felt smaller now, stripped of its mysteries. Without the weight of buried secrets, Rosa's few possessions looked exactly like what they were, the modest belongings of a woman who'd tried to build something beautiful from the wreckage of her life. Her jazz records, her sheet music, her photographs of Tommy and his father. Nothing hidden, nothing coded, just memories waiting for someone to finally claim them. Tommy sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully packing Rosa's vinyl collection into milk crates. The kid had insisted on helping, though he moved more slowly than usual. 3 days in a warehouse basement had left marks that would take time to fade, but his hands were steady and his questions had returned. "Good signs," the therapist said. "Uncle Vinny?" Tommy held up an album Vinny had never seen before. Rosa Morrison's only recording, released in 1969 by a small Atlantic City label. The cover showed a woman who looked like his mother but older, sadder, wearing the careful smile of someone who'd learned to hide in plain sight. "Should we keep this one separate?" Vinny took the album, studying Rosa's face. She'd been 43 when this was recorded, 5 years into her hidden life. The song titles were unfamiliar, but one caught his attention: "Letters to Children I'll Never See Again." His throat tightened. Even in exile, she'd been thinking of them. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That one's special." Catherine Sullivan emerged from the kitchen carrying a box of Rosa's papers. At 71, she moved with the deliberate care of someone making up for decades of enforced silence. The FBI had granted her immunity in exchange for her testimony, and she'd used her freedom to help them understand the full scope of what Rosa had preserved. Not just evidence of crime, but documentation of courage, proof that some people had chosen resistance over complicity, even when it cost them everything. "I found something else," Catherine said, pulling a manila envelope from the box. Behind the false back of that jewelry box, Rosa must have put it there after Tommy's last visit. Inside were 3 letters, each addressed in Rosa's careful handwriting. One for Vinny, one for Tommy, one for his father. Written, the postmark showed, just days before her final disappearance in 1973. Letters she'd never been able to send, explaining truths she'd never been allowed to speak. Vinny opened his with trembling fingers. The letter was brief, Rosa's words economical but warm. "Vincent, if you're reading this, it means you finally asked the right questions. I'm proud of you for that. I know you'll blame yourself for not searching sooner, but please don't. I hid too well, and that was my choice. I disappeared to keep you safe, and I'd make the same decision again. You were never an orphan of tragedy, sweetheart. You were a child of love who deserved a normal life, even if I couldn't give you one. Take care of your nephew. He has your grandfather's eyes and my stubborn streak. Dangerous combination. Be happy. That's all I ever wanted for any of you. All my love, Mom." The tears came then. 30 years of misplaced grief reshaping itself into something cleaner, more honest. Not mourning for a tragic jazz singer cut down in her prime, but grieving for a mother who'd sacrificed her identity to protect her children. The loss was real, but it wasn't built on lies anymore. Tommy looked up from his packing, concern creasing his young face. "You okay?" "Yeah, kid. I think I finally am." Later, after Catherine had gone home and Tommy had returned to his parents, Vinny sat alone in his own apartment, with Rosa's album spinning on his turntable. Her voice filled the room, older than he remembered, weathered by exile, but still carrying that quality that had made Ed Sullivan take notice in 1964. Still beautiful, still dangerous enough to die for. His phone rang. A potential client, probably, someone looking for representation in the small-time venues that had been his life for 30 years. But tonight, the work felt different. Not like settling for less than his dreams, but like building something honest from whatever materials he had. Torino talent, he answered, and for the first time in decades, meant it. Outside his window, Queens stretched toward the city lights, full of voices waiting to be heard. Rosa's story was finally over, but the family business, the real one, built on music instead of secrets, was just beginning. He'd learned how to fight back. Now it was time to remember how to live.